The BCN Liberation Triangle. Black Christian nationalism seeks to change society in order to accomplish the liberation of black people and realizes that we as a people are engaged in a struggle for power and for our survival. We utilize the BCN Liberation Triangle as a godly symbol to Kasanyawatu and bring black people together to create oneness and unity amongst our people, to build a nation within a nation, where we control our own institutions that governs our lives. The Liberation Triangle is a symbol of Kodi, where we voluntarily tax ourselves to fund the black nation, and is the financial basis of building a nation. The Liberation Triangle is also a symbol of Kazi, which is communal work and responsibility, where we collectively work together on a common program that's designed to liberate the African diaspora from the oppression, exploitation, and brutality of our colonial oppressors. Through Kasanyawatu, Kodi, and Kazi, we will once again build the kingdom of heaven on earth for our people throughout the African diaspora. As black Christian nationalists all over the world, we pledge to let the power of the Liberation Triangle work its wonders in us, to take the power of the Liberation Triangle to African people across the world. May God and the black nation be our witness that we exist to take black Christian nationalism to black people everywhere.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Let me start off with an apology for the handout for today. My good brother Konada's family had a family reunion, and I was assuming that we revived it. But he was vibing on something else.
Yes, sir.
So we wish them a safe family reunion. I was just going to let him know that the handout that we used last week is the same one that we want to use today, since we did not get through all of it. But we will have copies of that for you next week, and a new handout also next week as we kind of wrap up this discussion that we are having in reference to the African origins of civilization.
Right.
I want to just go over a couple of things before I move on into the PowerPoint presentation and some images. You know, people say an image is worth 1,000 words.
That's right.
So let us start off with kind of finishing up the reading that we didn't get to last week. And if my brother, you would read that whole back page,
Okay.
It'll set the stage for the presentation today.
All right. We discovered that thousands of years before the birth of the first hierarchy, Abraham, African high culture civilizations has already reached the zenith of that. The Africans had already given names to the planets and the stars in the universe. This took place as civilization moved outward from the east central Archipelago into Kush, Nubia, Punt, Kemet, and other areas at the north, Zimbabwe, Monotapa, the islands of Cuba, Marina, Dolphin, Madagascar, Malagasy Republic, etc. At the south, Congo, Ghana, Sahara, etc. to the west. Africans had already developed the pharmacology and the related disciplines necessary for embalming their dead for entry into the nether world, whence the terms heaven and hell originated. They had produced their foremost important pyramid builders, Zoser, Khufu, Cheops, Mahara, Maserinus, and Khafra, Sephir. no Hebrew helped to build any of the pyramids. Hebrews were not in existence anywhere in the world, much less having entered Egypt and subsequently been enslaved on the building of the pyramids. We know nothing of Abraham until circa 1640 or 1675 BCE at the earliest, and by then all of the major pyramids had been built. For example, the Pharaoh Zoser, who the Greeks named Zoser, the third Pharaoh of the first dynasty, who reigned from circa 2870 to 2850 BCE, had already provided the materials necessary for Imhotep, the great ingenious African architect and physician who predated Hippocrates by more than 2,000 years, to design and build the step pyramid of Saqqara. There were no Hebrews in existence at this time, for there were no Abraham. His great-great-grandmother, 10 times removed, was not even born. Pharaoh Khufu, whom the Greeks renamed Cheops, reigned after Djoser. He built the Great Pyramid, and some historians attributed the pyramid head Khufu, the so-called Sphinx of Giza, to him. He was followed by Pharaoh Ma-Serinus, who built another major pyramid. And then came the last of the great pyramid builders, Khafra, whom the Greeks renamed Sephron or Chephren. Up to this period in the history, the first hierarchy was not yet born. There were no Abraham and Eve yet. When the Africans of the Nile valleys, blue and white, were building their great pyramids, the existence of the hierarchy people was unknown. Thus, the Africans started to embalm their dead and develop the science of pharmacology to make what is today called mummy. There was no Abraham. When the Africans built their first canal, not that which is presently called Suez, but their earliest one, running west to east instead of the present south to north, there was no Abraham. When the pyramid text, writings of the pyramid walls and the coffin text written on and in the coffin of the Pharaoh began to appear, still there was no Abraham, the first hierarchy.
Thank you very much, brother. You might think that this reading is foreign to Black Christian nationalism, but it is not. As a matter of fact, it is found in the book,
Right.
Black Christian Nationalism.
That's right.
Part 5, Jeramoja Bebe Ajaman had the African historian Yosef Ben Jakahanan, affectionately called Dr. Ben, to give a lecture at a historic conference, the first national conference of Black Christian nationalist movement in Detroit, Michigan. What you have just heard is just a part of the 2 articles that's in the back of Black Christian nationalism.
Right.
So we're coming straight out of what I call the New Testament.
Amen.
All right.
And I say that to say that white folks have no pattern on spiritual ideas
No,
or
sir.
religious beliefs.
No such.
That's right.
History reveals that a people come together and create spiritual and religious texts.
That's right.
And then at a certain point it is put into what we call the Bible. But the Bible is a Greek word for little books.
Yes.
But this whole concept of Christianity or spirituality predates the Greeks by thousands of years.
That's right.
So when we talk about the origins of spiritual ideas, they come out of inner Africa. And we're not just talking about Egypt itself that we call Kemet, but deeper into inner Africa.
That's right.
Up to ancient Ethiopia or ancient Kushite civilizations, where evidence indicates that the first human beings evolved. Based on scientific evidence, as we talked about last week, we can go back to modern human society, Homo sapiens sapien, at least 200,000 years ago.
That's right.
And when we think about that in the context of a biblical story that is only about 6,000 years ago, something has been left out.
Wow.
A whole lot of something
Yes, sir.
has been left out.
Well,
And so when we get into independent research, when we start looking through our own eyes instead of European eyes, we find that there is a great wealth of evidence that documents the origins of spirituality and religion coming out of the Nile Valley, coming out of inner Africa, coming from the minds and hearts of black people.
That's right.
And predating any concept that may be associated with it or distorted by Europeans by thousands of years. So when we say the black Messiah Jesus, we're not just referring to the story in the area of the Levant, but we're talking about a story that even predates that story and lays the foundation for it. When we get into the actual evidence, we see very clearly that anything related to religion or Christianity comes out of Mother Africa, out of the hearts and minds of black people. And at a certain point in history, it is distorted by the Greco-Roman civilization.
Wow.
The whole concept of the eponymous ancestor, Abraham, coming out of the Ur of the Chaldees. Still, if you do research today on the ancient Sumerian civilization from which Ur comes out of, you'll find oftentimes that white people will say that they don't know where the Sumerians came from.
Wow.
But if you look at the oldest images of the ancient Sumerians, carved in stone, big nose, thick lips.
That's right.
And then when you go into actually the oldest literature and culture of ancient Sumeria, it's very clear that we're talking about African people. But when we back up even further, dealing with the evidence that the first people evolved out of Africa and then migrate to populate the rest of the world. This is a history that oftentimes has been kept from us, but it lays the foundation for a very strong positive self-esteem and group esteem, because most of our people's history journey starts off with slavery.
Yes.
Well.
And nobody really want to embrace, well, my ancestors were slaves.
Right.
Well.
But when we go back to Mother Africa and begin to look through African eyes, we see that not only were we the first people, but we were the first to build science, art, civilization, religion, and culture in the world.
Yes.
All right.
And so then it is our mission at that point is to go on and document it for our people and provide a varied basis of evidence that people can look at. We believe that the Bible clearly is a resource that we can look at if it is properly interpreted.
Well.
If we interpret it through the eyes of African people and to the reality that Israel was a black nation,
That's right.
then we can begin to see things a whole lot clearly. Thanks to our fellow teachers who have indicted the theology of Paul in about 3 or 4 dynamic presentations, we can see very clearly the distortion and at what time did it happen, and we can put that on the timeline. And that's why I put this timeline up on the screen, because for those of us who are searching for answers in terms of ancient history, specifically in the area of religion and civilization and culture, we need to understand that in our own minds we need to have a timeline. And then we begin to place events throughout history or our story on that timeline, and then we can see their association to each other.
Right.
We can see what came first and then what came after. Now this is a very powerful, beautiful timeline. The brother that put it together put a tremendous amount of work into it. And so I often like to use it because of the graphic references that it provides for us. If you can see this, the timeline here starts with kinetic culture in the BC time period at 5,200 years BC.
That's right.
Now let's have some comparisons to this concept. The Greek story, and of course white people are still teaching in all of the educational institutions today. You go over to the AU Center, all of the schools that white people control, that the Greeks were the first to do everything.
That's right.
That they were the first to invent civilization, science, and religion. And however, when we begin to put them on the timeline, according to the teachings of our grand master teachers, Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark, and many others, you cannot put the Greeks on the historical timeline no earlier than 800 to 1000 BC.
That's right.
And then you're being generous.
That's right.
In modern time, white folks are continually trying to push themselves back into a period where they never really existed.
Right.
So when you begin to get into your research, you'll find nothing about Greeks before 1000 BC. Other than they were associated with barbaric white folks who were migrating down toward the Mediterranean. And so we can see very clearly that they were not the originals teachers of spirituality or anything, actually. Then when you look at even Greek references themselves, the Greek's first historian is Herodotus. Now this person would have only lived around 450 BC. Okay, so that's some 600 years even after the Greeks come on the historical record. But he is then trying to write down the history of the Greeks, but he's also saying in his works that the oldest people on the planet were black people, and that the Greeks learned everything that they knew from African people.
That's right.
Well,
That's the first Greek historian.
That's right.
And that's an indictment right there. Then you have white folks in modern times who would say, well, Herodotus did not know what he was talking about. Now here's a man who lived in 450 BC.
Right.
Now you got some white folks in the 1700s saying, well, he didn't know what he was looking at. Okay? Now you see how messed up that is.
Right.
But let us just look at the timeline. I want to just get through this right quick so we can get to some other evidence. At 5000 BC, the Kemetic culture had already been alive and well in the Nile Valley. There's a date that's much older than this, what we'll call pre-dynastic Egypt. But here you have a variety of evidence that will document, from fossil evidence to genetic evidence, the culture that African people had developed, high culture, in the area of the Nile Valley. So we don't just say Egypt, because Egypt was the baby.
Yes.
And Nubia, ancient Nubia, was the mother, and ancient Kushite Ethiopia was the grandmother.
Yes.
So we go down up the Nile to the highlands of Ethiopia, and we see the origins of all the spiritual concepts that are related to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
That's right.
So as I just kind of scroll down through the timeline here, and this is of course available to you in the history class, what you'll be able to see is that, let me get my zoom back up. Here at 4000 BC, you have already developed what folks will call today the zodiac. So this comes from a high culture of astrology, looking at the stars in order for agricultural purposes, knowing when to plant, knowing when to harvest. Starting out, first of all, you had developed a stellar calendar based on the rotation of stars in the sky.
Wow.
Then you move from there, from this 5000 to 4000 BC, you move from there to develop the lunar calendar based on the rotation of the moon, and then here the solar calendar that is still being used today.
Yes.
Now this is still about 2,000 years before you even get to the Greek. The concept of right here, you can see the Ankh on the page right there, and all of those symbols indicate that you had already mastered these teachings long before the Greeks even come on the scene, that these concepts that are directly related to Christianity and Judaism. And then when you get down here, there's a whole host of where you got pyramid building going on, and so you had priests and priestesses that were a part of the ancient African culture. We'll look at some of those images in a minute. You come on down the timeline, so all of the major pyramids were built by this time, 2500 BC. So the Hebrews, as the white Jews relate to having something to do with the building of the pyramid, is clearly not the case, because they're not even on the historical record by this particular time.
Right.
Moving on down the timeline, going by thousands of years, you get down to like 1000 BC right here. And at 1000 BC, this is the first time on the historical record, right in here between 1000 BC and 500 BC, that you have mention of any Caucasoid, quote unquote, civilization.
Right.
All right, and then you get the Greeks, and their various so-called scholars, Herodotus, Plato, Thales, Aristotle, all those so-called Greeks that laid the foundation for human culture, don't come on the scene until around this time on the historical timeline. And then their historians already saying that they learned everything that they knew from these previous thousands of years of civilization that come out of the Nile Valley.
That's right.
So that shows you very clearly that everything starts with black people.
That's right.
In the Nile Valley.
Right.
And then from this period right here down to the divide line is where the Greeks and Romans take over, and they start redating history itself, and everything that was put down before, they take you out of history and put themselves in history.
Right.
So for the last at least 2,000, maybe 500 years, you're getting a distorted Greco-Roman version of the origins of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism.
That's right.
My brother, I see you here. Go ahead.
Brother, if you got time, will you scroll back to those 4 individuals that were documented by ancestors to show that we look like what they look like?
I'm gonna come back to that in some even better images here in a minute. But let me just let you see some of the symbols that are found in the ancient temples and the pyramids of ancient Egypt, so that you can see for yourself. These things are carved in stone. These are some drawings of the images that you might find, so that you can see that these images of various aspects of God already exist. I call them symbols of African gods. Starting out with the Ra, the sun god. And so you have a pantheon of African gods and goddesses. And when white folks coming in being uneducated, they were saying, well, these Africans are worshiping animals.
Right.
But the animals are symbols of attributes that these various animals have, and it is connected to the human culture of the Nile Valley. And we go on to document that even further. Here's a whole pantheon of gods and goddesses, and it represents aspects of the one God. We're not talking about worshiping a whole lot of different gods, but aspects of the one God concept already existing here in the Nile Valley. And the images that indicate the Trinity that our brother was making reference to. You got the God Ra, you have Osiris, you have Horus or Asar, and Haru, and Isis or Set. These 3 entities right here will eventually evolve into what we will call Jesus, Mother Mary, Joseph, Mary, and baby Jesus.
Right.
And these other God aspects are predominant within Nile Valley culture. And as we begin to reconnect with our own history, you're seeing concepts and images that are first depicted in human history that represent any kind of relationship to the concept of God or to the concept of deities. At this time, you have white folks still coming out of the caves of Europe as barbarians, and have no kind of culture that is any way comparison with the representations that you will see in these images that I'm showing you right here. All of these are various aspects of God, and in many cases, one of the things that you can see in the hands of many of these deities is the what? Is the Now, as Black Christian nationalists, that's a part of our uniform. Right. We all wear the We got rings, earrings, and all kinds of But oftentimes when we're talking about ancient religion, we don't refer back to the significance of these So we're doing it right here in the Bible class here today. The concept of writing already existed in the Nile Valley. It's thousands of years ago, and based on the history, the Greeks are one of the first Quaxart people to start writing, and they don't begin to write until around 750 BC. But you are already writing thousands of years before you pass this script, which I'll deal with more specifically next week, so you can actually see the development of the scripts out of the Nile Valley into what we would call the English alphabet today. But you not only will you see concepts of gods, as a matter of fact, and from the very beginning, the first gods who will come in Africa, as we talked about last week, are goddesses. You have the goddesses, understanding that we all come from our mothers. And in Africa, we talk about a matriarchal culture. So you have the goddess. We went a little more in depth last week in terms of the symbols, in terms of the solar disk, the cow's head representing Hathor, a female goddess, and then all of the modern day images of Jesus in the manger and Mary. You'll see the solar disk symbol behind their head. You'll see the cow in the manger. You'll see the ram there. These are all symbols that white folks stole from you, from your culture that existed in the Nile Valley. You can go actually into the tombs and temples themselves and see the hierarchy or the Metu Neteru the Metanetru, which is the ancient language, symbol language of ancient Kemetic culture, on the walls in all of the temples there for you to see. We just have forgotten our own language and culture. So we're trying to get back to that. But you see the god Osiris sitting on this throne, and he will be symbolic of what will later become Jesus Christ's concept and image. A story that is told here in the Nile Valley thousands of years before we get up to what we would call the area of the Levant. So we're trying to reach back and grab these concepts because the first gods in human culture are depicted as black people. You can see here in the center where you have God Osiris, Asa, white, the Greeks call him Osiris, and he's clearly black, depicted in black. The artist has a mastery of all colors, and nowhere in the Nile Valley will you see the god Asa depicted as a white person.
That's right.
It's always going to be black. The gods and the goddesses, as you'll see in these graphic images, will always be depicted as black. Matter of fact, when you begin to look at some of the garments that they wear, the crowns that they wear, connected from our own history, we don't recognize them until we do get reconnected. And then we understand that these devils have no way have any type of morality that they can advance to the world. So these concepts are there. They predate anything that you'll see related to Christianity, the gods and goddess concepts in the Nile Valley by thousands of years. We'll get deeper into these in terms of the actual attributes and characteristics when we get into more time in terms of the African history class. We invite you to be with us every Saturday from 1:30 to 3:30. And I want to give a special welcome to the brothers and sisters who are with us today that came out of the African history class. Raise your hand, y'all. They come from this. Give them a hand, brothers. Yes, indeed. Yes. So when we talk about God being black, we're showing you the actual evidence of it. But I always like to, in the history class, bring forth the teachings of the Grand Master Teacher, because I am simply a student of those who come before us.
Yes.
One of them is this brother right here. He's with the ancestors now, but he left us a tremendous amount of work.
The whole Christian Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament, out of the Egyptian Book of the Dead.
That's right.
So that if you want to go to the source, don't go to King James. Go to ancient Egypt, and you got a Bible that's 10,000 years older than anything that these Christians have. You have students going through college, graduating with a degree, and then they can't even write their own name. I began to study the history of Africa, particularly the history of Ethiopia and Egypt. You go back and study the ancient history of Egypt, and especially the religion of ancient Egypt. And they had a Bible. I have a good English translation of it in 3 volumes in one, called The Theban Recension of the Book of the Dead. And in this, you take this Egyptian Bible and compare it with the King James Bible, which is popular among the Protestant denominations in the United States. And you study the Egyptian Bible and you study the Christian Bible. The Egyptian Bible goes back 10,000 years. The King James Bible only goes back about 300 years. And then you study these two books and compare them, and you find out that the Christians took the whole Christian Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament, out of the Egyptian Book of the Dead. So that if you want to go to the source, don't go to King James. Go to ancient Egypt, and you've got a Bible that's 10,000 years older than anything that these Christians have.
See, so that's when we're disconnected from our history. We are unaware of what our great historian, Dr. James, is talking about. Let us look at a couple of other these clips that have been documented in terms of ancient Kemetic culture, the foundation of spirituality coming out of Mother Africa.
Neteru in Kemet were Asar, Aset, and Heru.
Or to give them the more usual names, Osiris, Isis, and Horus. These three deities originally came from Cush.
These are very, very important triumvirate.
Their stories are as much mythology as they are history.
Now, according to Diodorus Siculus, who was one of the ancient Greek historians, Osiris was originally a community leader of very early Cush. He doesn't call him a king of Cush, but he makes it quite clear he was a leader.
Asar is regarded as the founding father of Kemet. He unified the two lands. He established the first nation state in the recorded history of humanity. He is said to have introduced writing, the writing which the ancient Kemites referred to as Nedu Neter, or the writing of God when it was written, or the words of God when it was spoken. He is also said to have introduced agriculture and theology.
Also decided to take civilization to certain parts of the Nile Valley, as well as the other parts of the world.
Asar married a beautiful Nubian woman by the name of Aset, who was his co-regent, not his inferior, his co-regent. And when Asar decided that he was going to travel to other parts of Africa to share his technology with his brothers and sisters on the continent, he left his wife Aset to run their nation.
And he was very successful, very admired, and this provoked the jealousy of his brother, Set.
And Set then plotted to overthrow his brother Asar.
Set, or Sete in ancient Egyptian, murdered his brother, dismembered his body into 14 pieces, and then scattered those 14 pieces throughout Kemet.
When Set learned of the murder and dismemberment of her husband, she fled for her life, and then she was searching for the missing parts of her husband's body. Set found 13 of the 14 parts of Asar's body, and as she found each body part, she cleaned it, she anointed it with oils, and she laid out 13 parts out, and she literally remembered her husband, wrapped his entire body in bandages, and created the first mummy in recorded history of humanity. As Set was preparing to bury her husband, she grieved because she was about to bury the man that she loved. She grieved because she was still a virgin. They had never consummated their marriage, and thus she would never bear children by the man that she loved. And according to the story written on many papyri in Kemet, carved on several temples in Kemet, the spirit of Asar came and impregnated his virgin wife Set. And then 9 months later, the virgin Set gave birth to their son Heru.
Now, in the case of Isis or Set, she is the original Virgin Mother, and she is seen suckling Horus. He is shown as a child suckling his mother, and he's wearing the pharaonic headdress, making it clear that he was born a king.
Haru is the son of Osiris, and he is the embodiment of order. He has to take over the kingship, and he has to do that through struggle.
So Heru was born, son of a virgin. She was born with a specific purpose in life. That was to restore his father's kingdom, to do battle with his uncle Set and reclaim his father's throne.
Heru would then take up his father's struggle, in a way, against his uncle Set.
Almost classic battles, not so much between good and evil, it's more a battle between order and anarchy.
And Heru eventually triumphs over Set.
At that moment, Heru was transformed, miraculously transformed into a falcon. He flew into heaven to meet with his father Asar, told Asar that his Set, his father blessed him, and Heru then returned to Kemet as the legitimate heir to the throne. And when he ascended to the throne, the symbol of the Herubadet, the winged sun disk, was a symbol that was carved above the entrance of every temple in Kemet to serve as a reminder of Heru fulfilling the reasons for which he was born. And at the moment Heru reclaimed his father's throne and was crowned the king of Kemet, his father, a star, was resurrected from the dead and took his place on the throne of judgment.
And the Jesus story says, I and the Father are what?
One.
Are one. So you hear this story right here thousands of years, and we can't talk about this without bringing forth some evidence from another Grand Master teacher, Brother Ashra Quace.
Yes.
Who goes to the Nile Valley.
Now that's
Showed you carved in the wall.
talking about your African ancestral history. Now let's break it down. On this relief, brothers and sisters, you can see many concepts where they came in, as I said, like scavengers and picked different pieces. On this particular relief, you can see where the Western world through Judaism took a piece of a concept of the creation story from. You can see where the Greek philosophers took a concept of Greek philosophy from. And you can also see where Christianity took a concept, European Christianity took a concept from. So let's break it down. Again, carved in stone on the temple of Aset, right here on the island of Philae. It is here. It tells where the Western world literally came like scavengers and took various things to make up the Western world. And one of those things is we see that Hermes Trismegistus in Greek mythology, they literally took it from Tahuti. It is here that our ancestors had a study from the 42 books of Tahuti, representing science, law, and intelligence, who was represented as the ibis bird that you saw. We saw those little white birds that we saw from over here. So our ancestors looked at nature. We didn't worship the bird. It was an attribute of science, attribute of intelligence. Tahuti writing down the deeds of our life on earth as we lived here. This is where the Western philosophical thought, Greeks took their concept of Hermes Trismegistus from Tahuti, now called Fatu. So we see Judaism took God Kanun, fashioning man out of clay and called him Jehovah. Notice the God Kanun fashioning man on the potter's wheel out of clay.
Right.
This is where Judaism took a portion of this to make up their Genesis story with the Sanhedrins around 250 BC. From this relief right here of God fashioning man and woman on the potter's wheel. And they took other concepts of Atum from Heliopolis creation story, or the city of On, to make up their Adam as a man, when actually it was Atum the son. And we see European Christianity took from the goddess Isis and Horus and made up the European, again, let me express, the European version of Mary and Jesus. Copied directly from these beliefs right here. So you got Greek philosophy, where he took from Tahuti and called it Hermes Trismegistus. You got the Jehovah Genesis creation story and the Bible, where they took from Kanun, fashioning man on the potter's wheel out of clay, and they turned it into making man out of clay, Adam out of clay. And you also got Christianity right here showing Isis lactating or breastfeeding the holy child Horus, who was born of immaculate conception and virgin birth.
Okay, let's go to Ashra Quace one more time. So this is what we call first-hand research, where you actually go back to the Nile Valley. Now you know where this lecture was done, right?
Where the priests also baptized the initiates once they finished 40 years. This is long before John the Baptist. Now, this temple called Karnak today, or Ibn Asud, as our ancestors called it, going into this temple, as I said, these are temples of books and stone. The pylons are pages of history telling of our story. But as you go into the temple, you see the ram symbolized as Amen. That was the Zoot type, as Amen. Now, we see Ursa Ma'at Ra, September Ra Lamesu Vari Amen, little practice you can say it too. Here we see, that was his throne name, as they call Ramsey from Ramesu, is now under the ram, symbolized as Amen. 2,000 years ago, our ancestors worshipped Amen, and the symbol was the ram because the sun was in the constellation of Aries. I show this because, let's go to Christian art, and you see the ram in the European Roman Christian art. Why is that ram in their Christian art? Because they were deifying and worshiping Amen. Is this animal worship here? If they have the animal ram represented as Amen in their art, and it's not animal worship, why they come into Kemet and say animal worship and pagan and heathen and polytheism and all these other type of negative terms? Let's look at this. When you also go and look at and see the Ram of the Lamb over, as you see a Roman character of a Jesus here, it looks like. But when you look at that figure with the Ram of the Lamb over the shoulders, it was taken from Kemet, what I showed you, when the Ram of the Lamb and ancient Kemet, where the king became one with Amun, and the Zoot type was the ram. But let's go over 4,000 years ago to the tomb of Meroka. The tomb of Meroka of the 6th dynasty over 4,000 years ago, that existed thousands of years ago on your release, and the book's in stone with the Ram of the Lamb around his head long before the Roman ark. There's a couple reliefs that I want to point out to you just to evoke some thought, because a lot of things I'm going to do is to evoke some thought, to give you some ideas, some concepts that were here long before the Western world was even in existence. Meroka, Mustafa Meroka, and this is Teddy. And Meroka is the Grand Vizier, or the Tajeti for Teti. All right, so that's very important. So I'm going to show you, the Tajeti. He's a Tajeti, that means Vizier, for Teti. Okay, we'll leave an opening in case people have to walk through there. I'm going to show you here, as you see the priest with the ram around his neck. But when we look at Leonardo da Vinci's artwork, you see Leonardo da Vinci's artwork with the lamb or ram around his neck. You can see where the origin of that came from. But this is carved in Meroka's tomb over 4,000 years ago.
So you can see there's clear evidence when we go back to the Nile Valley. Your ancestors carved in the tombs and the temples this whole story that lays the foundation for everything associated with Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Right. Because Islam builds on the Christian story and then moves on. So the foundation of all of that comes out of the Nile Valley. And then our focus, based on European conquest, is the area of the Levant and the story of Jesus, which is a retelling of the older, more ancient story by thousands of years. Right. So you can see very clearly the concepts come out of inner Africa. The evidence is still there, carved in stone, in some places 5 inches deep, as if our ancestors wanted to make sure that the story will be there for you whenever you return home. Well. So this is the foundation that you can see actually in the stone carving and the artifacts and the pictures that represent the earliest presentations of deities to the whole world. Yes. And it is under your tutelage that the Greeks and Romans find this when they come in as conquerors. And then they begin to shut down those temples, persecute the priests and the priests, and then they begin to retell the story through their own eyes. And then they give you a Bible with white Jesus and all of that in it, is which we are indoctrinated in today. Now on next week, the final session in this trilogy, we're going to deal specifically with linguistics and scripts, because if we follow the basic logic that the oldest spiritual teachings have been written down, we need to see what form they were written down in. We need to date that, and then we are track the development of the old hieroglyphic scripts to what will become what we call Old Hebrew, and then from Old Hebrew to Aramaic, and then on up forward. So you can see the origins of the ancient spiritual writings, because you were writing thousands of years before any white folks learned how to write. As a matter of fact, the Greeks say that they learned how to write from the Phoenicians, or the ancient Canaanites, who were the cousins of the ancient Egyptians. Right. And so we'll see how that script was passed down from generation to generation, and then we taught white people how to write. Then they flip the whole script, and when they come in as conquerors, and then tell a whole different story that the majority of our people have been indoctrinated in. But when we get back to the truth, based on the hard evidence that we have, you can see very clearly that you have a lot more to be proud and thankful of. Thank you very much. Let me just, I want to share with you, please take one and pass it around, because I think I got a few more somewhere else. We put together in the history class a visual library. We call it the People's Library. It has over 100,000 files. And the section on religion is very extensive. It'll take you months just to get through it. And we have more and more images, documentation, videos, and scripts so that you can trace this on and get involved in the actual study for yourself. If there's something that you may be interested in terms of having in your own library, you can see me after this class, or you can see us at any time in the African history class. Thank you very much.
All right.